A desert planet with twin suns.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
Use my knowledge. Much to learn, you still have.
Welcome back to Twin Sun Talks, folks. I'm your host, Jonah Lou. Thank you so much for listening. This is the 40th episode, and to commemorate this landmark in the show, we are having a very special episode. This is going to be my first solely theory-based episode. So we'll see how this goes. If y'all enjoyed this, please leave a comment below so I can do more. And if you didn't enjoy it, just keep that to yourself and let me figure it out on my own. Anyways, without further ado, let's go into visions.
To continue, we need one singular vision. My vision.
Alrighty, so like I said, this video is going to be entirely theory-based. I'm essentially just going to be going off of a single train of thought and kind of teasing it out and seeing where I think a certain storyline would go if it were to actually happen. And so with today's episode, with the Book of Boba Fett coming out in a few months in December, this theory is largely connected to the rumor that the main plot of that show focuses on Boba enacting vengeance on those who have wronged him. He has kind of a book that's almost like a hit list, so he's going to go through all of the people who have wronged him in his past, and with his newfound power as kind of this king of Jabba's old underworld empire, and he's going to essentially just pick them off one by one. And my thought process is that who has wronged Boba Fett more severely than Mace Windu? Y'all can see where I'm going with this, and I apologize if this is more Windu content coming from this podcast than y'all signed up for. Sucks to suck. You should have found don't find another podcast. Stay with this one. But I love Windu, and I'm going to be talking about him a lot. So I wanted to do this episode, and so I'm doing it. And if y'all didn't like it, then don't let me know. But let me figure it out for myself. Anyways, I think that Season 1 of Book of Boba Fett will largely follow Boba's vindication against another foe like Cad Bane or someone like that, and then we will get a teaser for a later confrontation with Windu in a second season. But the million-dollar question is, what was Mace Windu doing this entire time between whenever we last see him in Revenge of the Sith and whenever the show takes place, about 5 to 6 years after Return of the Jedi? That's a really long time. That's close to 30 years. So what was he doing in the meantime? And that's what this episode is going to answer, at least my opinion or my theory as to what Windu was doing this entire time. So what I rather enjoy is essentially the plot of a potential Star Wars fan film that's going to be coming out I've talked about this YouTuber a lot, but his name is Star Wars Theory. And he's already made one episode of this fan film, and he's trying to make it a multi-part series. But essentially what it is it's a story following Vader, but the second episode is going to be him facing off with Mace Windu and a clan of Jedi survivors on Naboo. So what I would like to see happening, I think that that's an interesting concept. But before I go into that, I'm just going to give a brief profile of Windu for those of you who don't know too much about him. So he was born on Harun Kal. He's a human male. He was a member of the Jedi High Council and actually served as Grand Master and Master of the Order for a brief period of time. He has a purple lightsaber, and he was the creator of a new lightsaber form called Vapat, which is a variant of Form 7, which was deemed too aggressive for Jedi to use, but essentially Windu curated his own lightsaber form that helped him walk the line or toe the line between light and dark. He was one of the most powerful Jedi of the Clone Wars era, second only to Yoda, and was allegedly slain attempting to arrest Chancellor Palpatine. Now, the interesting thing about him being Grand Master of the Order was that he'd actually taken the mantle of that leading up to the Battle of Geonosis. He was actually in the process of taking over that position from Yoda because Yoda was getting old and he wanted to be able to kind of shepherd Windu in that role while he was still alive rather than waiting until he had already died, But whenever the Battle of Geonosis happened and Windu essentially hesitated to kill Dooku and instead chose to intimidate him rather than outright killing him, he felt so much obligation to be fighting the Clone Wars on the front lines that he decided to cede the Grand Master position back to Yoda so that he would be able to serve more consistently away from the temple, which I thought was rather interesting, and that's actually something I didn't know until fairly recently. So, this theory might not be quite as developed or theatrical as I might make them in the future, but for the sake of this episode, I think that it's pretty solid. So, I think that Windu is going to gather kind of a group of surviving Jedi, not necessarily to make a final stand, but essentially just to kind of protect them. He doesn't know what Yoda and Obi-Wan are doing. He's not entirely sure what is going on in the Galactic Theater as a whole. He just knows that he needs to try to preserve the Jedi Order after what has happened. And I think that they have some sort of confrontation, and I think this is a great premise for a Windu series, even if it's just a one-off season and we don't get any more. I think that this would be a super cool series, but they have a confrontation with either Vader or the Inquisitors or someone like that, and it's just a brutal massacre of a solid chunk of the last surviving Jedi in the galaxy. And I think that maybe Grogu was even among the Jedi that were in this group, and that's how he gets captured by the Empire. And all of this is just too much for Windu, and it drives him into deep grief and self-imposed exile. And he cuts himself off from the Force, much like Luke in The Last Jedi, and he hides out on remote worlds, on a remote world in the Outer Rim, or maybe even in the Unknown Regions, and just kind of lives his life like kind of a more, almost just like a farmer. He just kind of keeps to himself because he doesn't feel like he deserves to take part in the Galactic Theater due to his failures. But eventually, a disturbance in the Force so intense causes him to notice something and reconnect to the Force for the first time in decades, and this would be the death of Palpatine. This is something that even someone who was cut off from the Force would be slightly attuned to in some way, especially someone of Windu's caliber. And with his connection to the Force reborn, Windu would be able to commune with Yoda and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Anakin as Force ghosts, and they could come to him and kind of help him out a bit. They'd be able to guide him through retaining his consciousness after death, coming to terms with the demons in his past, like his hubris, which caused the fall of the Jedi Order to begin with, his hesitation to kill both Dooku and Sidious, and his inability to save the Jedi who he was trying to protect after Order 66 happened, and also help him to suppress the darkness that lingers within him, as he wasn't as actively trying to suppress it in his time in exile. He kind of let it run freely within him, which makes him a little unstable. And as he rebuilds and reforms his abilities, he begins to yearn to return to the galaxy, or like the galaxy proper. But his only issue is that his transportation off-world is inoperable due to decades of unuse and the fact that he hasn't moved from this planet in a solid 30 years. Or this would be closer to 20 years. The ghosts of Yoda and Obi-Wan will lead Luke Skywalker to Windu, who finds Luke's quest to start a new order admirable, but is filled with too much remorse for the massacre of the original survivors to be a part of it. So he and Luke resolve to stay in touch but go their separate ways, because Windu feels that his path lies elsewhere away from the Jedi at this point, and he needs to do a little bit of soul searching before he can figure out what that path is. So that's when Boba, or not that's when, so this is like around the events of Return of the Jedi that this happens. And so he essentially, this is 5 years before The Mandalorian even happens, so 6 years before Mando Season 2. And whenever Boba comes out after all the events of The Mandalorian Season 2, whenever he's paid off his debt, he will go and he will essentially, I think that the events of Book of Boba Fett Season 1 will play out, and then he'll learn of a Force-sensitive male around, I think that it would probably be around 80 years old, so he's a pretty old guy, and with a missing arm and a purple lightsaber. And we're going to have a whole thing. It's essentially, he's going to spend the next season hunting down Windu. And it's going to culminate in a showdown between the two of them, which I hope is absolutely amazing. And it has to end in Mace's death, I would assume. Because Boba failed to kill him before as a child, and he's not going to fail this time. But that's my theory, and I've already kind of gone into that theory a bit for how I think Windu's going to come back and what he had been doing during the events of the Galactic Civil War and all that, and why he hadn't stepped in. He just didn't know it was happening because he was in his self-imposed exile, parsecs away from anything of significance that was happening. So yeah, this is a shorter episode. I didn't know how long this was going to go. But I hope that y'all enjoyed it, and I can try to make these a little more in-depth in the future, and try to make them a little more theatrical if y'all would like, assuming y'all enjoyed this episode. But that's all that I have for this episode, but it wouldn't be a proper episode if I didn't leave you with a little bit more. So this is keeping on theme with today's episode, but Mace Windu has a Force ability, a very rare one, called Shatterpoint. And what this essentially means is that Windu can see quote-unquote Shatterpoints in the Force, meaning that he can identify a person or object's weakest point, and exploit it to their detriment. So this could either be a physical weak point where he can hit something in a very precise spot and it'll just fall apart, or a mind's weak point where he can kind of tug on a certain string and get exactly the information that he's looking for, because the mind is vulnerable in this very specific spot, which he can only see through the Force. And also, bonus more, I've been doing these a lot recently, but Samuel Jackson has said in an interview that he thinks that it'd be pretty cool if Windu was still alive, which doesn't mean much of anything, but Sam Jackson is down to come back as Windu. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, I think that'd be pretty cool, but say lovey. Anyways, that's all that I have for today's episode. I really hope that y'all enjoyed it. If y'all did, make sure that y'all let me know. Either DM me on Instagram at TwinSunTalks or comment on my YouTube page. And don't forget that we're available on streaming platforms now. So make sure that you follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And or check out our website. That's still up and running. If you have any questions or corrections, feel free to email me at twinsuntalks@gmail.com. And yeah, you've taken your first steps into a larger world. May the Force be with you, and I'll see y'all in the next episode. Bye, friends.